Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for giving your time up today. And thank you, Edge, for allowing me to be part of the webinar today. It's certainly been interesting so far. I'm sure we're all a bit tired of talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, especially now that we're back to normal. However, it's a good time to look back, assess, and move forward. I'm sure a lot of different industries are all undergoing the same process at the moment. We're all just trying to make sure that if needed, we can use the lessons learned to make sure that we're better prepared and we're not impacted to the levels that we saw over the last 2 years. The bereavement sector is going through the same processes. Each burial and cremation authority are probably looking at how they can protect and ensure a more robust service if we're ever in the same situation. I hope this presentation will give you an outline of some areas that you need to consider and what an insight, I can give you a bit of an insight to what the industry associations are also trying to do. So looking back, lessons learned. What are the key questions you're going to be asking yourselves? How did you cope? Were you organised? Did you run at capacity? Were you all running around stressed? Could you have done things better? Maybe you already had a pandemic plan in place. If so, how did that play out in reality? Were areas missed that weren't thought of? Now, this is the time to dissect those plans and look at the areas that didn't work, but also highlight the areas that did, and maybe share it with others within the industry. Did you have enough staff? How did you cope with sickness and isolation and work from home? Were your ID departments able to cope with all this? And were your staff stressed and anxiety? How did you look after their welfare? How did you manage your burial space in your cemetery? Were plots allocated on an on-need basis? Were they easily accessible? Did you have issues with digging those graves? Did you have issues with your grave diggers? Was capacity an issue? Were you able to access up-to-date government information? Was it easy to follow the guidelines as they were released? Did you easily navigate all the different websites to collate that information? You had the NHS, SEFRA and the government websites. How easily and quickly did you manage to decipher the information and relay it to your staff? And were you able to easily update your data and your reports to your local resilient groups each week? How much time was spent at these meetings? So many questions that need to be asked. But once you've got those answers, now's the time to put an excess death plan in place if you didn't already have one. So looking forward and your forward planning, how does this pandemic or excess death plan look like? Well, a cemetery especially has a lot to think about, and each area will need to have different alternatives and where possible multiple solutions you may have to look at different solutions to any given problem. There are probably 5 key areas that you'd need to look at in your plan. Staffing levels and your working patterns. We all know that staff are key to the running of your operations. Did you have sufficient staffing levels in the first place? Can you draw on other areas of your business in time of emergency? Or could you link in with other local authorities or private cemeteries in your regions that might be able to help with resourcing? You might want to think about temporary shift work patterns for your staff in an emergency. And cross-training staff. Ensuring the robustness of your service, the need to cross-train staff to cover all areas in the likelihood that they may be needed. The second is your burial space. How much burial space do you have? How is it laid out? Do you have areas that are easily accessible more than others areas in your cemetery? Are there possible areas that maybe that you can be reserved for an excess death situation? And your grave digging requirements, and how do you organise this? Some cemeteries and councils use external contractors. Some allow funeral directors to organise the grave digging for each burial, and maybe you use internal staff. Whichever way it is done is a plan to ensure that you're prepared. And it'll be essential to know that your contractors have also got plans in place. Do you have the capacity to dig graves in advance? And what about information? During COVID-19, accessing ever-changing information and new guidelines took up a lot of time. Navigating different websites and advice, that was sometimes very grey. In your plan, how will you ensure your authority keep up to date with this information? And as we said, cemeteries and burials, have a lot to look at. Do you have space for mass burials? Can you allocate a section just for this scenario? Some of the country has more land availability than others, possibly working with other local areas or somewhere within your region that is ever needed, that an area could be laid out for a mass burial situation. What about your grave digging? Can you facilitate multiple pre-dug graves or install vaults with lids that can be used quickly and easily? Do you have the right equipment? Do you have enough shoring, boards, matting? And if you still hand dig graves, could you purchase a digger? Can you ensure, or do you have the space to make sure that you've got enough stock in place for these things, or even access to be able to order them when they're needed? And again, more importantly, do you have the expertise to deal with an excess death situation? Do you have enough trained ground staff to be able to see you through that? Maybe you need to look at running drills in certain situations. All these things need to be part of your pandemic plan and what you're thinking of doing when you're putting it together. A lot of areas to think about, I'm sure. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, all the industry associations came together to try and ensure that everyone was given a clear road through the ever-changing climate. The same associations are also looking at lessons learned through the pandemic and how to move forward to put an industry-wide pandemic plan together and how they can help. Now, during the pandemic, the DMAG group came together. You might have heard of the Deceased Management Advisory Group. It's made up of the industry associations that covering burials and cremations, as well as funeral directors. And if you're a member of any of these organisations, you'll have received updates from them throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. They acted as a voice of the sector, liaising with government departments, ensuring that our needs and issues were raised, as well as feeding back information to the people on the ground doing the job. Communication was key in these emergency situations. Part of the discussions during the COVID-19 was a difficulty in knowing capacity for both cremations and burials across the UK. There was no easy way to collate the data. And I'm sure sending weekly data to your LRG was time consuming and not always easy. During those discussions, the idea of a one-step portal was born. However, during the pandemic, it was never feasible to take it any further. So as part of the looking forward and putting together an industry-wide excess death plan together, FARS was born that you heard mentioned on the pair presentation earlier. So this is the time to establish a meaningful plan and look at what practical steps can be taken as a sector. If you're a member of either the FBCA or the ICCM, you may have seen a survey that came around recently regarding the funeral availability reporting system. It was a survey to obtain your thoughts and feedback of such a system. And I must say the survey results were all really positive. So what is FARS? Well, FARS is a system that is activated in an emergency. It will be owned by the FBCA and the ICCM and primarily managed by the ICCM in any state of emergency. The idea is a portal that displays a UK map which displays funeral availability for crematoria and cemeteries. It will be displayed by colour-coded pins, red, amber, green and grey, each colour representing a percentage of availability. The idea is that you could click on a pin and the details of that cemetery or crematoria will appear. It will be free to use and accessible to funeral directors. There'll be no requirement to have any existing software system to be able to take part. Crematoria will be easily automatically registered onto the system, and it'll be easy registration for cemeteries, just having to register their names, addresses and their booking details onto the system itself. For this to work and be meaningful, it's important that everyone takes part. No matter what size cemetery, if you're a small parish council to a large local authority setup, everyone counts. We want to encourage everyone to register and be part of this scheme. You don't need to be a member of any association to take part, and you don't need any sort of current booking system. So it's a work in progress. So industry software providers have come together and have offered their time and resources free of charge to take part in this collaborative project to build this portal. The portal is there to benefit the sector and is not a selling tool for any provider. The idea is that when it's set up in emergency, the map will be filterable by area or local resilience group areas. Any criteria for red, amber and green will be set by the DMAG group. There will be an option grey to show if availability is out of date. They'll be able to toggle on and off, as you can see on the map here, to only show what is required. And each clickable pin will display booking details such as your phone number, email address, the name and address of the cemeteries, as you can see on the right-hand panel here. So, how will it work? It will be activated in a national emergency by the FBCA and the ICCM. If hospital mortuary capacity is under pressure, FARS could display mortuary availability. If crematoria capacity is exceeded, FARS will display burial capacity for private and the principal authorities. If that's getting full, it will display burial capacity on the FARS system for the town, parish and community councils also. And if the situation is worsening, and if burial and crematory capacity is exceeded, FARS could display the local resilient group's mass burial locations and booking details. The system itself also will be able to automate real-time data for your local resilience groups and the government. As you can see, it's quite an important portal and system that will help automate a lot of what we had to do within this pandemic, and hopefully release some of your time regards to the status and data that the government were asking on a weekly basis in order to update what they were doing. So, what do you need to do next? All you need to do is register. The crematoria will automatically be registered, but as a cemetery, all you need to do is go on the website and add your registration details, the name, your address, your emails, your website details. At this stage, this is all you'll need to do. And we're hoping the system won't ever need to be activated and won't ever be needed, but we would like to be in a situation where we're prepared. We're hoping that once this is up and running, and there's lots of work going on over the next 12 months to make sure this works properly, to carry out drills, just to make sure that it does work. As you can see, it's quite an important system to move forward with. Again, why should you be part of this? Why should you take part? It's preparation for an XF death situation. It's for everybody, parish councils, local authorities, private cemeteries, for everybody to take part to ensure that we know where we're at as an industry. It's for emergency use only, and it's to be able to collate data for your local resilience groups and the government when it's required. I would urge you all to take a look at the detailed presentations and the prototype websites. The details are on here, and I'm sure they're accessible after today's webinar for you to have a look at. So You need to keep in the loop. It can sometimes be really difficult to know what's going on within the sector or access advice when needed. What's the best way to keep in the loop? If you're not already a member of the ICCM, I would strongly consider joining the ICCM. They have access to up-to-date industry and government information. They liaise with other industry bodies and the government departments on our behalves. They'll always update you weekly with their newsletters and emails of everything that's going on. They have a quarterly journal, which is your journal, so you can have your say and you can put in articles about what you're doing on your sites and have a look at what other people are doing. They organise learning conventions, a time for you to meet the suppliers and other people in the same job as you and to be able to make some real good networks. They have regional networking groups throughout the year so you can meet and discuss other things that happen in your local areas. And again, to meet people in doing the same job as you, someone that you can rely on if you need some help. And importantly, they give your technical advice and assistance. The amount of times you sit in an office and things happen and you're not unsure where to turn, well, you just need that bit of advice. Is what I'm doing legal? Is it legal or illegal? What are my options? The ICCM are there every day of the week by telephone or email to give you that advice and help and assistance. And the good news is you get all of that and training courses added in there for under £100 per annum. So I would urge you to have a look at it, visit their website, and if you're not already, think about joining the ICCM. They're there for you to help you as cemetery and crematorium managers. I hope today's webinar and my presentation has been useful to you. So I'm open to questions about the ICCM, FARS, or anything else I can help you with. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. Very much appreciated. I'm going to get a few questions now fed in from Julie. So Julie, over to you.
Yeah, so the first question was actually a comment, really, and it was from one of our delegates, which I agree with completely. The updates that we had from ICCM during the pandemic was just phenomenal. It was just so helpful. It was a really difficult time, especially for those smaller burial authorities that normally only have 1 or 2 burials a month. I never thought I would ever need to know how to plan a mass grave. I hope I never need that information again. But the ICCM were just brilliant, you know, with all that information. Which leads me on to the sort of the question. The pandemic excess death plan is a really good idea. Once you know, a council becomes a member of ICCM, is all the information available on the website for us to guide through creating a plan?
Yeah, not this one. I can have it put on there if you need this information, and I can get Julie to add it to our website just to give you some idea of the kind of plan that you should be putting together. Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, because it is one of those things that, you know, especially if you are small, you don't need that information very often, but to have a plan at hand would be really useful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's it, Chris, from the delegates at the moment for questions. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Julie. So, Marian, we've got a couple of minutes spare, so I thought we'd just have a conversation about a couple of things here. Yeah, I think the important thing maybe to labour the point a little bit with parishes particularly is that with the proposed funeral availability reporting system, there is no requirement for them to have any form of computerized system to be able to use FARS. Now, the registration side of things it's obviously we can't start any of that, but maybe you could just expand and share with everybody a little bit more about actually what the next stage is in the decision-making process for parishes before we go live. What's going to happen with the ICCM? What's the next thing that's going to happen?
Yeah, so the next thing is we've got board meetings and meetings come November, December, I think, in planned to take this forward. We've had it's gone out to the members to get their feedback. and their thoughts on the whole process, which, as I said previously, have been really positive. The next meetings that take place is how we now actually move this forward, speaking with yourselves and all the other software providers in practice, how this is going to work out, what the costs are involved moving forward, and in practical terms, how we will manage it as an institute, and how we'll collaboratively work with the FBCA and the other organisations to ensure that everybody has access to it. The idea is that it's a really simple system that everyone has access to. It's not about getting into anybody's personal data on any site or any cemetery or parish council, but to only be used in an emergency. So the idea is in the next phase, I think we're talking a bit more about the actual practicalities, what it should look like, what information it needs to give, and how that information comes through from anybody's different software or from each individual site, and how they input that information when it's required. I think then.
Would you like me to show it?
Yes,
put it on the screen.
that'd be good. You've got it there. That'd be great.
Right, here we go. All right, everyone. So this is the prototype file system from a collaborative project with Pair Technology and another web provider. So what we've got here, if we imagine on the left-hand side, this is actually how it normally would come up. So this is a prototype. It's not real. I've got red, amber, and green pins here. So the idea is that you could actually, if you were a fuel director, you could go into here and you could actually search for where the availability was. So if we're in Coventry, where we are here, I can see at the moment it's saying that Rugby is green. So I could click on the green button there to get then the contact details over here. So I could ring Rain's book and actually make a funeral arrangement. Whereas if I look down on here in Coventry itself, they're on amber at the moment. So if this was my normal regular crematorium as a funeral director I was arranging cremations with, I can see I've got better availability at Rugby and also down here at Warwick at the Oakley Wood. Now, the idea is that actually funeral directors will be able to see on here where they could make that funeral arrangement. And it may well be a crematorium or a cemetery that they don't normally use. So they'll be able to come in here, they'll be able to toggle the actual buttons on the left-hand side. If it got really busy, then what will be possible to do is the ICCM can decide that whenever the site is opened, the pins for the cemeteries will be turned on as well. So then you get pins here for all of the burial sites for the principal authorities. If then that was not providing enough capacity for the excess death situation, the ICCM can then decide to display parish and town council cemeteries. So all those pins would appear on here. And if that wasn't providing enough capacity, the ultimate is then to display the location of where the mass burial sites are. Now, because it's the friendly pair map, we can put this into an aerial view. So if I wasn't familiar, for instance, where actually the Oakley Wood site is, and not surprisingly, it is in a wood, you can toggle it across to that. And that's one of the nice features of the actual pair map there. You can toggle from one to the other. And it's about bringing all of this technology together. And I suppose the other thing just to talk about is that actually the theme for this webinar has been cloud administration. In an excess death situation, the last thing we want to do is actually have lots of pieces of paper flying around. So we are trying to encourage collaboration between the funeral director software suppliers and the suppliers that are also providing crematorium and cemetery software, so that actually when an application for a burial or cremation is made, that information could be passed, which is very useful in this situation when FARS is open, electronically. So rather than having a burial application form signed on a piece of paper, it could be done online. That does seem to be a challenge. It's going to take a while, but you can imagine if FARS was active, having paperless communication between funeral directors and the family and the burial authority will make it that much easier for parish and town clerks who are supporting a future pandemic or excess death situation to do what they need to do at a safe location, which is probably going to be working from home. But that is a nice prototype, and we are looking forward to the possibility that that will actually go forward as a constructive outcome, I think, Marian, from what we were actually has been a challenging couple of years, to say the least. Did we want to touch on maybe what phases 2 and 3 of the FARS was as well?
Yeah, so phases 2, you might have to remind me, Chris, because I haven't got it written down here.
No, I can assist. That's okay. So phase 2 is where phase 1, the availability would be down to the cemetery and the crematorium to log on and say whether they were green, amber, or red, and there's rules. Phase 2 would be to allow the software suppliers to change their software so that actually the software will automatically update FARS with what the availability is, particularly useful for busy crematoriums and large burial authorities, but equally applies to anybody using the epitaph system as well. Now, the phase 3 is where the local resilience forums and the governments will be able to automatically download the availability information from FARS. So they won't need to log on and collect it. They can automate that process. And when we get to phase 3, that's when there's the real potential then to provide good availability information, really on a kind of like a next day type basis, to the resilience forums and to the government, so that they can make effective decisions based on availability and to get to the point where they know whether they're going to need to actually open up the mass burial sites. That will give them that real-time information, and it will also, at the end of the day, our funeral directors will be happier to know where they can make the arrangements. And so they will be pleased that they have this free website that they can go to, use it on a mobile, use it with the family, and it will only be there when they actually need it to. And when there's no excess situation, it'll get turned off, right? It's not needed. So normal commercial arrangements will carry on, but it'll allow everybody as a sector to come together. And I think from my perspective as a supplier to town and parish councils, I really felt that actually in the last pandemic that the capacity of the burial authorities at that level was an untapped resource, because there was no way to coordinate to actually sort of offer them as a sort of a potential to bury. Particularly, here's the challenge, is maybe thinking about actually the councils passing policies to actually decide in a future pandemic or excess death situation, do they have maybe an area of the cemetery set aside for an excess death situation? Maybe it is a particular area itself, maybe it's not, or it could be simply that actually they just will say, look, we will dig 10 graves and offer that actually up to support it. I mean, Marian, what thoughts do you have sort of in terms of practical things that parishes could do in the next pandemic, assuming FARS is there, based on your sort of experience of town and parish? What are the sort of things that maybe a clerk could think of to actually propose to council as a practical? Do they need to set space aside for?
Well, I think a lot
of
parish councils and town councils should be able to collaborate with others in their own area, because some cemeteries are quite small. They may have single cemetery sites with limited capacity in some areas of the country. So I think it's really important maybe that you actually have a network within a region of various councils that can come together and actually say, within a 50-mile square area, there's so many parish councils or town councils. This one hasn't got much space, this one's got quite a lot. As a council area or region in an excess death situation, would we say that actually this is where we will have capacity within a region? It's very difficult sometimes for the smaller parish councils, if they have only got one cemetery, to be able to do that with all the will in the world. But I think, you know, coming together more, you know, you don't have to do things as individuals. We can do things in areas or regions that are more effective, especially for the smaller cemetery sites. and start putting those groups together and actually meeting and networking with your parish councillors within that area that run cemeteries, and coming up with a group plan can be also as effective as just trying to do it on your own. You know, there's some, you know, if you've got a cemetery and you can reserve space, that's fantastic and it's great. But to say that I'm a bigger cemetery, I've got ample of space, I will do this and I'll ensure that that will cover the parish councils and this and this area also, with whatever agreement can be put in place, I think that works.
You could also share digging capacity. So
yeah,
if obviously in an excess death situation, you might have problems with your normal arrangements for graves to be dug, particularly if it's a small parish, maybe relies on the funeral director. But if they're collaborating locally, that capacity could then be shared.
Suddenly, exactly, it trebles or doubles. You know, when we talked about, when I was looking about your excess death plan, and I mentioned that, you know, do you have the capacity, if you link in with, you know, the other authorities and cemeteries within your areas, that in these situations, can you borrow staff from each other? And things like that. It's all about working together, not as individuals, I think, in an excess death situation.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Marian, superb. Thank you very much.
Okay.
We will be publishing this video in the following days, so people can actually watch it at their leisure. And I think the thing to actually say to everybody wrapping this up, actually, if you're not a member of the ICCM, join. There is nothing, no disadvantages at all. I mean, when I started in the sector 30 years ago, there were choices of organisations. There is one surviving organisation, that's the ICCM. That is the organisation to join. That's why the Society of Local Council Clerks actually engage for the ICCM to deliver all of the training courses on cemeteries for the SLCC. They are the experts. It's great to actually have a resource like that for less than £100.
Exactly.
There's
and
not
all
many
the technical
things
officers are lovely people, and they've all done the same jobs as you, so they understand every scenario that you may call and have in your armour. So, and we're there for you.
I would thoroughly support that. It's that there will be scenarios of things that only occur occasionally for most people, but the technical officer at ICCM will have seen it before, will know how to do it, and can actually give you that support that you're going to need, even if it's something that never happens again, like an exhumation. How many times do you do that? There are people who can help you with that. Join the ICCM. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.